idea has been slowly cooking in my head ever since the end of Natlan's last patch. Back in the Archon quest inversion of Genesis, version 3.3, Nahida hides the truth about Scaramouche's past inside a fairy tale to protect it from being altered by Irminsul. The Traveler, being a descender, is one of the few who still remembers the true version of events, untouched by the changes. And after the recent summer events, as I was trying to figure out how this might connect to the next region's Archon quest, I realized something. Themes repeat not just once, but over and over again, in different forms. That's the basic idea, sure. But behind that surface repetition, there's something deeper. It's become clear that Genshin's writers love to first tell a smaller version of a theme inside an event, a character quest, or a regional story, and then retell that same concept later, on a grander scale, inside a major Archon quest. Basically, every storyline in Genshin is like a fragment of a bigger book, with each region acting as a symbolic chapter. Individually, they might look different, but together, they tell a hidden story that mirrors something much larger than we first thought. So, I went back to some of the key themes and events from the Archon quests, character stories, and world lore, and I think all of them represent real ancient events that once shaped Teyvat. Now, before we dive in, I'll summarize each Archon quest briefly, just to keep the context clear. These aren't detailed retellings. Like on the wiki, they're short and focused, with a few lore crumbs I personally believe are connected to something much deeper. And if you enjoy this kind of video, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, grab a snack, and let's get into it. The main idea behind Mondstadt's story is that a dragon meant to protect the city becomes corrupted and manipulated by the Abyss Order, eventually turning against the very people it was supposed to guard. We also learn that the god of this region, Barbatos Venti, had been asleep for a long time, probably to prevent erosion, until the events of the Archon quest forced him to awaken. And, contrary to what most people believed, the dragon Dvalin and the god himself were actually friends. The whole concept of Dvalin being corrupted by the Abyss and attacking the land he was meant to protect seems to mirror the Dragon King's corruption and his eventual attack on Teyvat. The friendship between Venti and Dvalin might be the first recorded case of a god-dragon bond, later echoed by pairs like Zhongli Azhdaha, King Deshret Apep, Remus Scylla, and Expalanque Ochkin. You could even include Focalors and Nouvelette, though that one's a lot more subtle. The Traveler's ability to purify, or technically absorb abyssal energy, was introduced here, and thanks to it, Dvalin was saved. Then we have Dragonspine, where we meet Durin, an abyssal dragon who later manages to obtain a human body thanks to albedo and alchemy. That supports an old hypothesis that Rheindotter was experimenting with alchemy to preserve life, in Teyvat transforming beings into abyssal forms and then trying to reverse the process after the cataclysm so that humanity could be restored. In a way, albedo actually succeeded in what his creator once tried to achieve. The fact that Dvalin survived the abyssal poisoning while Durin was reborn in a human form might symbolize that the Dragon King lost his physical body but never truly died. He continues to exist in another form. We'll see that more clearly in the next region. As for the abyssal energy that the Dragon King Nibelung once brought into Teyvat, it might have been absorbed by one of the previous descenders. Unless, of course, there's a mountain deep in the Dark Sea, twisted by the abyss, surrounded by celestial beings. In Liyue, the main story centers around the idea of a god faking his own death during the Rite of Descension, all to hand control of the region over to its people. Meanwhile, an external force, the Fatui, takes advantage of the chaos and summons the ancient god Ozial to attack Liyue Harbor. But in the end, they fail. The whole idea of Rex Lapis shedding his dragon form and walking among humans might symbolize what happened later with Ochkon in Natlan, and perhaps even what could happen with Nibelung in the future. The Fatui and Oshul could represent the external abyssal threat that attacked Teyvat when the Dragon King was absent, the kind of event that repeats itself again and again in history. In Zhongli's second story quest, we meet Azhdaha, a being on the verge of breaking free, whose consciousness has split in two. One corrupted part trying to escape, and another, still sane, asking Zhongli to seal him away again. This duality recently echoed in Nefer's story, showing how that same theme keeps coming back in different forms. We also learn more about Zhongli and Guizhong's past, a bond of friendship and loss. It might have been the first of its kind chronologically, followed by Deshret and Nabu Malikata's connection. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the relationship between Ajax and the Snow Maiden turns out to be another reflection of that same ancient cycle, a bond echoing between gods, mortals, and those who fall between. The recurring message here is clear. Divine beings choosing to walk among mortals often marks the start of great change. Every time it happens, the world of Teyvat shifts closer to the truth or closer to collapse. In Inazuma, the main theme revolves around a god who isolates herself from her own people, creating a puppet to rule in her place, while she retreats into meditation, hoping to avoid erosion and heal from loss. But by doing so, she ends up hurting the very people she was meant to protect. We, the Traveler, join the resistance and confront the Electro Archon, making her realize that her version of eternity was never truly eternal, and that there are other ways to preserve what she loves. The idea of Kagemusha, the shadow double, is very prominent here. A was the shadow of Makoto. The Raiden Shogun puppet was the shadow of A. And then there's Scaramouche. If we put them together, Makoto, A, Scaramouche, and the puppet, we get 4 shadows. They all look nearly identical, for obvious reasons, but among them, one always ends up rebelling against the master. That whole theme of separation and isolation might symbolize the false sky of Teyvat, a world sealed off, where no one can enter or leave freely. The Watatsumi resistance could represent the rebellion of the angels, led by the first angel and the stranger the traveler's mirror in a past age. And Enkanomiya, buried beneath the waves, might represent Khaenri'ah, with its 2 dynasties just like Dainichi Mikoshi's dual ruling systems. Meanwhile, Orobashi, the serpent god who defied the heavens, mirrors the role of King Ermin, the fallen dragon who dared to challenge the sky. The patterns keep repeating: shadows, reflections, rebellion, and isolation. Every region retells the same story from a different angle, the same struggle between divinity and humanity, between truth and illusion. In Sumeru, the main idea was that in the past, the previous god of the region, the greater Lord Rukkhadevata, was corrupted by the abyss. So she created her own clone, Nahida, to serve as the new god. This new god was imprisoned by the authoritarian sages of the Academia, who wanted to replace her with a false god, created by trapping the minds of the people inside simulation cycles and using the generated brain fluid to power their device. We free Nahida, and with her help and the collective calculations of the people, we defeat the false god, Scaramouche. The idea of Rukkhadevata creating her clone might symbolize the heavenly principles creating a clone of themselves, Paimon. We know that Phanes didn't have it easy during the battle against the first angel and the Voyager, and since Nibelung brought the abyss into Teyvat, the chances that Phanes was also infected by it are pretty high. So why not make a backup copy just in case? The sages of the Academia symbolize the Fatui, who want to create a false god by collecting the Gnosis, the remnants of the third descender. This region also introduced the idea of Irminsul and memory manipulation, which allowed Scaramouche to erase himself from people's memories, literally rewriting the past. Then, he chose to live on, carrying the memories of his sins to atone for them. That might hint at the idea that the heavenly principles themselves are trying to atone for their own sins, traveling with us through Teyvat, forming bonds with both humans and dragons alike. The concept of a collective consciousness, hive mind, appeared multiple times here. In the Akasha system, in Nahida's story quests, in the merging of the fungi with Apep, in Golden Slumber, and in Alhaitham's story. This could be hinting that the dragons of Natlan might use the Huitzilopochtli device to convert everything into phlogiston data as a way to protect Teyvat. The idea of machines imitating consciousness also appeared through Karkata in Tignari's quest, possibly foreshadowing that dragons may one day take mechanical forms to survive within the abyss. The main idea of Fontaine's story is that the previous goddess of the region created humans out of oceanids, and because of that, according to an ancient prophecy, they were all destined to dissolve back into the primordial sea. Later, it's revealed that the cause of the Great Flood was actually an external threat, a creature that feeds on the energy of the primordial sea. With the help of a dragon who had taken a human form, we managed to defeat this threat. The current goddess of the region had split herself into 2 parts, and in the end, she decides to return her divine authority to the dragon and live as a human. In the finale, the dragon turns the oceanids into humans, saving them from the prophecy of destruction. The idea that Egeria created human bodies for the Oceanids might symbolize the concept of creating humans from the souls or remains of dragons, which aligns with Mesoamerican mythology. It doesn't mean that the humans of Teyvat evolved from dragons, but rather that dragons can evolve into humans. That might be why some characters still show animalistic or draconic features. The theme of an external threat and a great flood might symbolize the return of the Dragon King carrying abyssal energy and the flood caused by the death of one of the moons. Remuria in this context represents the Natlan dragons, whose people turned themselves into golems to survive the prophecy. In other words, dragons transforming themselves into phlogiston-based machines. A similar idea already appeared in Sumeru through King Deshret's technology, and it's possible that the same plan existed for the humans of Khaenri'ah. The main idea of Natlan's story is that the region holds a combat tournament to choose the strongest warriors, who will fight the abyss and prevent it from corrupting the memories of the past stored within the Night Kingdom. The people of Natlan rely on the sacred flame and receive blessings from the Waebs in the form of ancient names, a gift made possible by the previous god of the region, who had received help from an external entity. With the help of 2 Outlanders, the god of Natlan defeats the external threat. However, using the blessing of that external entity meant that the god was bound to die. One of the Outlanders ends up sacrificing themselves, making a deal to spare the god's life. It's also revealed that the dragons of Natlan survived. They went underground beneath the volcanic mountain, where they turned themselves into phlogiston data. One of the dragons, seeing that their kind was doomed to fail, chose to help humans by teaching them how to use the dragon's energy system. The idea of the ancient names symbolizes the Gnosis, and the tournament symbolizes the Archon War. The story of the dragons going underground represents Khaenri'ah, while protecting the Night Kingdom from the Abyss mirrors the protection of Irminsul, which is also located underground. Mavuika represents the heavenly principles, and Capitano represents the third descender. Ronova likely symbolizes the external force beyond Teyvat, possibly one of the witches. And finally, Kukulkan represents one of the moons that betrayed the dragonkind. Nod-Krai is going to be all about the moons, without a doubt. I think the stories of the moons will parallel the roles of the Shades and Celestia. As for Snezhnaya, I believe its story will revolve around the idea of a nation ruled by an empty throne, a government guided by servants who believe they're following the ruler's will, when in reality, the throne is empty. That empty throne of Snezhnaya will symbolize the empty throne of Celestia, and just like the heavenly principles, the Tsaritsa is trying to live among the people of Teyvat until the very end. I think that because of the time, both the heavenly principles, which I believe Paimon is a part of, and the Tsaritsa spend among humans, they'll eventually relearn what it means to be human, forming new connections and discovering an alternative way to save Teyvat without destroying everything once again. As for Kaenri'ah, my current speculation is that it represents the first human civilization, and its fall came from humans trying to defy the gods, attempting to become gods or create new ones, which led to an abyssal invasion, mirroring the return of the Dragon King. And with that, the story comes full circle. The end is the beginning. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I know there's no real cure for SPGS brain rot, but as a topic for reflection, all the symbolism scattered across Genshin felt like something worth digging into. I'm not saying every parallel here is 100% correct. Maybe you've spotted connections that are even deeper or make more sense. If you did, definitely share them down in the comments. I'd love to read what you think. And as always, this was Lily. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and of course, have a great day.